Good morning, members, officers and members of the public who are viewing the live stream of this meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Michael Atkins and I'm the chair of this committee. Please can those of you present in the chamber note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, is likely to be broadcast at some point. Also note the camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers are advised to wait a few seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. If you're participating in the meeting via the live stream, please indicate you wish to speak via the chat column and don't use the column for any other purpose. Please make sure your device is fully charged and that you switch your microphone off unless invited to do so otherwise. Please ensure that you have switched off or silenced any other devices you have so they don't interrupt proceedings. Please use a headset when speaking and hold the microphone close to your mouth. And when you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure you switch your microphone on. And when you finish addressing the meeting, please turn it off immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, don't talk over or interrupt anyone. Item 1 of our agenda today is apologies for absence. Patrick, do we have any apologies for absence?
No, Chair. All members are present.
Fantastic, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interests to declare in relation to any item of business on the agenda? And if an interest subsequently becomes apparent, please raise it at that point. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just there is reference to the city deal in the reserves and the GCP, which I'm a member of the Assembly.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any further interest to declare? Councillor Sandford.
I'm a non-remunerated director of Ermine Street Homes, which I think are mentioned somewhere in the accounts.
I'm sure they are. Thank you, Councillor Sandford. Any more? Councillor Howell and then Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, on a document as thick as this, the County Council are probably mentioned somewhere, and I am a member of the County Council.
Thank you. Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. Investment Partnership, also South Cambridgeshire projects. I'm not sure if they're mentioned, but they certainly feature in the financial affairs of the Council.
Thank you all very much. Before I go on to item 4, if the committee is happy, I'd just like to introduce, we have some guests with us today from the accountancy firm KPMG, who will be our audit firm for financial year 23-24 onwards, when the current cycle finishes. So they very kindly come and joined us today. And I'd like to give them a few minutes just to introduce themselves, and we can ask them a couple of questions if we have any. So I'll hand over to our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So my name is Andrew Cardozo. I'm a director at KPMG. I've been at KPMG now for 25 years. I know I don't look it, but I have. I'm a director. I'm responsible for local government audit across the Midlands and the South patch that we are auditing currently. We're glad to be back in the market. We've been out of the market for 5 years. We've now got 70 local authority audits plus 15 pension funds to do. And those local authority audits include police and fire and waste authorities as well across the country. We have 400 public sector dedicated auditors. I'm a CIPFA trained accountant, always worked in the public sector. I've worked on a number of local authority audits prior to us exiting the market 5 years ago, as I said, including Northamptonshire County, Northampton Borough, and all the districts around Northamptonshire, which, if you Google my name, you'll see the kind of work that we had to do, especially in terms of validating the budgets that were being set and the work on Northampton Town Football Club. We also worked on the Grenfell fire inquiry, and also in times past worked with Derbyshire County, Derby City, and other unitaries across the country. We have a full team of public sector, as I said, dedicated auditors, 400 plus across the country now, and that includes 100 new graduates and apprentices that we've just taken on in the past 2 months, which again will be dedicated to public sector audit, including the local government work. I've got 2 colleagues with me, the senior manager and the in charge. They'll introduce themselves.
Thank you, Andy. I'm Debbie Stokes. I'm a senior manager, and like Andy, I've been with KPMG now in excess of 20 years. I've got a broad range of experience, and I've worked a lot on local government prior to us being rolled off the contracts. So I've worked on districts, city councils, police, and most of the districts, to be fair, in the Midlands. So I'm looking forward to working with yourselves.
So my name's Shania Wilkes. I've been at KPMG for just over 2 years now and public sector the whole time. It's my first time on local government, so I'm looking forward to it. But I have worked across a lot of different public sectors in general.
And just very briefly, just to sum up, so we're here to do the 23-24 audit onwards for the next 5 years, plus the extension if you wish to take that extension up for the PSA contract. We're ready and we've already started our planning and risk assessment working with Peter and his team. So we hope to get our plan out for the 23-24 audit, regardless where you are with your current auditors and their current audits, to get the plan out for the 23-24 so you know what we'll be looking at. And we've looked at some of that planning and risk assessment in the year of our audit, 23-24, which is really important from our point of view. And we'll look to get that plan out by the end of March 24, so that you have an idea of what we're going to be doing and how we're going to be auditing yourselves. And again, we want to work, as we always have across all of our organisations that we audit, in partnership. It'll still be robust, it'll still be very challenging, but it's about working in partnership and being pragmatic about how we audit you and the issues that you face going forward as a local government body. So looking forward to working with yourselves, and again, happy to take any questions, as the Chair said.
Thank you all very much. I will just inform the committee that KPMG have asked for some kind of sort of initial documents disclosure and data from the team, but they haven't received that yet from our officers. So no kind of minute, detailed questions, please. But anything more broad than that, I'm sure they'd be happy to have a stab at. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Heather Williams.
Through yourself, Chair, not so much of a question, more of a welcome from all of us. And that at least in your initial words, that sounds very encouraging about the partnership building. And I think a lot of us would appreciate that. We used to have workshops with the external auditors pre-COVID. I hope that's something that you would consider. I always found them very productive to get the best out of officers, auditors and committee. So look forward to working with you. I hope that you will sound just as cheerful and happy when it comes to the end of your first audit, and I hope in the nicest way that we don't take up too much of your time.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any other questions for KPMG? Councillor Leamy.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask, do you have a plan of work to arrange a handover with our current auditors, please?
We haven't yet. We're still waiting to find the right time, put it that way, in terms of when your current auditors are going to complete their audits, etc. We have a letter that we will send out, introduce ourselves and find a time that is mutually convenient. And again, there is a detailed programme of how we hand over the audits to make sure it's as smooth as possible. That transition doesn't impact on the officers, it's purely our time and the outgoing auditors. But that's part of the PSA contract as well, that it has to happen in a professional manner. In terms of just answering the previous question as well, we will be undertaking workshops with officers and with members to introduce what we expect from an audit, what you should be expecting from an audit, and if there are any new accounting standards, etc., happy to introduce those to yourselves at a high level. You don't want to know the detail of what the auditors and the accountants are doing, but at a high level, what's that impact for yourselves as a district council?
Thank you very much and welcome today.
Thank you. Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, could I extend my welcome as well and just ask the quite simple question about South Cambridgeshire and how you're beginning to understand the district, because I know the audit process is kind of, has to be done almost irrespective of where you are, but what impressions are you gaining of South Cambridgeshire as a district?
Very early days, very early days. I mean, it's a lovely building you're in. And again, part of that would be, we will start looking at your budgets, we'll start looking at your outturns, we'll start looking at the kind of service demands that you have. As a district, you have to be part of the system now as well in terms of how you cooperate, not just with the other councils around you and the bigger council, that is Cambridgeshire County Council, which is one of Debbie's new audits as well, but also in terms of the system and the NHS and the housing associations, so all of the public sector. How do you work with those? The initial conversations we've had with Peter, obviously there are things that you have to do and there are challenges going forward, as with all councils, but we've been quite pleased in terms of the openness from Peter, in terms of his team and how they've engaged with us already. So I'm looking forward to it, but it's until you actually get into the actual detail and into the weeds, then we can't say for definite.
Thank you. Any further questions? I might just a cheeky one from myself, if that's all right. You say you've sort of cycled sort of back into to this nature of work, perhaps after a few years. How do you feel the well, I guess first sort of reporting standards and what have been the kind of major changes in that time, and I guess also interesting to have your perspective, having sort of been in and then not in, how the kind of the audit market itself has changed over the last few years and the overall system of public audit. Briefly, no need to.
Yeah, very. When we exited the PSA market, we still held on to our local government work in Scotland, so working with Audit Scotland, and we also had the one audit that had gone outside of the PSA contract, so we do East Hants District Council, and again, that's one of my audits, to keep our hand in terms of what was happening within local government. I worked in local government as well. I spent 4 years at Dudley, MBC, so I am someone who understands the kind of inner workings of a council and the demands that you have. In terms of the standards, a lot of accounting standards have come and been introduced into local government, which have impacted, especially in terms of 240, in terms of fraud work that we have to do extra, and 315R, which again, in terms of the data analytics work that we do, which makes the audit much more sophisticated, much more whole population auditing, rather than sample-based auditing, which has got to be better for yourselves in terms of the comfort you get from the audit we do, but it's also very comforting for myself and Debbie as the senior manager in terms of the work that we can do to actually understand what are the transactions. In terms of the market, it was broken. When we left the audit market, that was because we were priced out. And it's quite clear that the price was too low. The price that we went in at 5 years ago was the right price to do a proper, robust and challenging audit. That wasn't what the PSA wanted. They wanted the lowest price. Sadly, we have ended up where we are 5 years later. The fact that we're back in and we're doing it at the right price again, we know we can do a quality audit for that price and deliver on time.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and that's something for us to take away and think about. But so welcome from me as well. Thank you so much for coming along in person today, and I'm sure we look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you very much. So we return now to the stated agenda. Thank you for that. Item 4 is the external audit results report for.
Chairman, can we have the minutes first? Yeah.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I did miss the minutes. I got too excited at our guests. Yes. So thank you very much, Councillor Howell. We have the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October. I have received one request for an amendment, which I will read out now. This is an amendment to minute 7, the 6-monthly strategic risk report. We've had a request from an officer to replace the second paragraph with the text. The Policy and Performance Officer agreed to raise the question as to whether an additional risk was required in relation to sufficient training for both officers and councillors. And that does accord with my recollection of that. Are there any further amendments to the minutes? Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. I must say, first of all, the word excitement in an audit committee is not normally used, so well done. Chairman, with regards to the last meeting, I was present and YouTube has proved that I was present. So if I could just be added to the people attending, please. Thank you.
Certainly, I'm sure we can make that change. Are there any further amendments to the minutes? Yes, apologies that your presence was missed there. It is very valuable to us. Right. Well, I will sign a revised copy of the minutes after the meeting then with those amendments. Thank you. We now come to item number 4, the External Audit Update Report on the 2021 accounts. This was published as a supplement shortly after the rest of the agenda, so I hope you've got a copy of that in front of you. I would like to ask Janet Dawson from Ernst & Young, our current auditors, to please present this report. Thank you very much.
Standing work, and I think part of the reason for having this additional meeting and this additional report was to be able to be in a position to tell the 2021 audit, and we are in a position to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. You'll see in the report that at the time of writing there were one or two areas that were still outstanding, but I'm going to hand over to Mark just to give you an update on where we've got to on those and the position of the audit, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Janet, and thank you, Chair. So if I could take you to your page 7 of the supplementary, which is our page 5 of the report. So that just outlines the status of the audit that was obviously at the time of writing this report. So the one substantive item that was remaining was around leases testing. We have now completed that work and agreed a final disclosure to be included in the final set of accounts, which hopefully will be signed. We also had a number of closing procedures. So the main item on there was the reviewing a final version of the accounts and agreeing the adjustments that were required to get to that position of a final set of accounts. Again, we've worked closely with officers and we are now in a position to have an agreed set of accounts, which Peter will present later. Once we've received a set of financial statements that have been signed by Peter and other individuals and the letter of rep, we'll be in a position, as Janet says, to finalise the audit and give our opinion. If I can just take you onto your page 8, our page 6. So this is the summary of risks. So there are some changes from what we presented in October where we've completed work. So I'll just go through those briefly now. So the first two risks on your page 8 are the fraud risks. So one over management override and one regarding capitalisation of revenue expenditure. So there were no changes from what we reported in October. We didn't find any fraud within those areas. I should just note, as we reported in October, we did find that 1.3 million of REFCUS expenditure was incorrectly classified, and that's been moved to revenue by management. The next risk on there is the valuation of investment properties. So our internal valuers concluded their work on reviewing your 6 investment property assets and identified that 3 of those fell outside of a reasonable range. That resulted in a 8.6 million adjustment to reduce the value of those assets. The main cause of those was around the assessment of the leases. So the initial valuations were valued using freehold, but actually these assets are held on leasehold, which has an impact on the yield, which flows through into those valuations. If I can then take you to page 9, which is our page 7. So accounting for COVID grants, we've now finished that work. There have been quite a few adjustments relating to COVID grants, and that's really due to the initial assessment by the council, accounting for all those grants as principal, but there were actually some agency grants from government, and that has a different accounting treatment, and that accounting treatment change is what's resulted in those adjustments in the accounts, of which there's further detail in section 4. The next risk is the presentation of disclosure of accounting items. So this risk was raised in our audit plan in response to findings from prior years and really covers the whole of the accounts. So clearly now that we've finished the work on the accounts, we've finished the work on that risk, and the number of adjustments we've identified in section 4 is linked to that risk. The next risk is capital accounting entries. So this is work we do over your fixed asset register and the capital entries that appear in the financial statements. Again, there's no change to what we reported in October. We identified a number of adjustments around investment property classification, capital financing in the council's reserves, and also this brings in the requirement for a leases note that is now in your final version of the accounts. And then finally on page 10, so our page 8, so valuation of other land and buildings. Again, we've now completed that work. We did identify a cumulative £13.2 million increase in your council dwelling valuations. So 12.9 million of that was due to indexation rates. So the initial valuation was based on indexation rates that weren't supportable. And therefore, when you flow through the new index or the updated indexation rates, that resulted in an increase in those valuations. There was then a smaller adjustment of 0.3 million, and that was due to Beacon groups where assets had been mixed up in terms of the property types within those Beacon groups. And then finally, we got the pension liability. So we completed the work on that area, including our consideration of the updated triennial valuation. All that work resulted in a 0.85 million decrease in the pension liability, and that was due to timing differences in the valuation of pension assets in the pension fund. So that's a summary of the risks. And I think we're happy to take any questions over that, unless there's anything that Janet wants to add.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you both very much for that overview. Questions from councillors? Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple. I'll start with potentially the easiest one. So page 27 of the supplement, page 25 of the report, significant weaknesses and arrangements. It goes through and says, however, the unaudited statements were not published until 23rd of December 2023. So I just wondered if we could have some clarification as to this, because I don't believe any of us here have crystal balls and we've not quite made that date yet. It's not that close to Christmas.
Sorry, do you want to go through all of your questions and then I'll go back for a response? I can do, if you like. The other point that I would just like some more clarification on is, scroll through, Chair, on our page 39, report 37, it does refer to the best value notice. And the wording says, Council, we recommend the Council continue to consider the impact of guidance and any statutory direction it may receive. I just wondered if we could have some elaboration on that as to what you think the Council should do in relation to the best value notice. And then my last question, Chair, sort of, it does kind of fall, we've had it referenced by EY, but it's also in the next agenda item, so happy to take this when you see fit, or have a response from officers on this, as well as auditors. It's in relation to the overstatement on the investment property, and our external auditors have referenced yield. Just some more understanding as what the impact this has on the yield of our investments. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Does somebody from Ernst & Young want to have a first stab at answering those? Thank you.
Shall I? Thank you very much about the date, Heather. That's yes, that's a typo. I think because it was 23rd of December, we probably carried on the 23, and we do sometimes have an issue in terms of which years we're operating in. So we will correct that before. Obviously, it's a draft, but that's really helpful. On the best value notice, now clearly our responsibilities are to look at the arrangements in place in terms of how the organisation governs itself, makes decisions, how it uses its information. Clearly, we are looking at the organisation's assessment as to how it's operating under the 4-day week, and then how it responds to any external notices. So we're not commenting on the situation itself. We're looking at how the organisation itself responds. And so our recommendation is really, to ensure that the organisation is absolutely on top of this issue and making a decision in line with its governance procedures, and then it has a satisfactory response to whatever challenges it receives. So that's the point of us raising it, that clearly it's a sensitive issue, and so we are concerned that the organisation ensures that it has an appropriate response. I hope that answers your question. I think I might leave the yield question either to Mark or to Peter.
Thank you. That's right. Yeah, Peter, do you have Mr. Maddock? Thank you.
I apologise, I've got a little bit of a sore throat, so I'll try not to. The valuation of the investment properties, as Mark has said, was based on freehold rather than leasehold, and our valuers had obviously not picked up that point. So obviously the values we were originally quoting were overstated compared to what we now have. We took the view that we wouldn't do any further work on this, on the basis that when we come to this time, when we come to the accounts for next year, we'll be revisiting this figure anyway. So we just felt that there wasn't really any more work to do in relation to this. I mean, the yield is based on the value. You know, if you compare your yield to your value, so obviously that in theory will go down, but equally that gets reassessed on a regular basis. So I think the problem with valuations generally is there is quite a bit of subjectiveness around it. But as regards the audit itself, you know, we're happy to accept the advice of EY and their valuers, and we've gone along with that figure. I haven't really got anything more to say other than that, but clearly the yield compared to the value of the property will change as soon as you change the value of the property.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Russell, Ernst Young, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, clarify what we're talking about in regards to yield, because there's yield for valuation purposes versus yield in terms of the amount of income that properties will get in. So the yield we're talking about with the valuation. So the valuation of investment property in its simplest form is a calculation where you take the future income of that asset from its leases and you times it by an accounting yield, and the yield is a reflection of risk in the market. So obviously if there's more risk to an asset, then therefore the yield drives a lower valuation. So the difference between freehold and leasehold, for example, so a freehold property is deemed to be less risky, whereas a leasehold is deemed to be more risky, and therefore if you're on freehold, your valuation will go down because, you know, if it's on a like-to-like basis, because that will impact the yield you can get from a valuation perspective, but it wouldn't impact the yield you get from income from the leases that have been signed.
Councillor Williams,
That
did you
helps.
want to come back on any of that?
Yes, thank you. Can I just clarify, the valuation, is that for the purpose of the accounts, or was the valuation on purchase? Was it valued wrong on purchase? I think that's because then we need to, you know, go through and learn lessons from that, if so. And equally, Chair, it probably would be wise, given this, for us as committee to see what the yields look like now we are aware of this information.
Sorry, do you mean as in the kind of income yield that we are receiving from our investments?
Well, the income won't necessarily change, but the risk and how many years it takes to cover compared to the length of the leases. There's lots of information here. We've been told there's been a significant change. I think it would be sensible for us to look at this and give it some scrutiny to make sure that we are, as a council, fully aware of what happens in future investments.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll discuss that suggestion with the finance team here. Maybe there's some way we can assess this. I'm not particularly interested. Sorry, I'm not particularly interested in sort of theoretical values several years ago. I think I'd be much more interested in knowing the situation as we stand now. One item I did want to just check with Mr. Malik. I mean, I believe we have since sold at least some of these investment properties and at pretty and at fairly robust values. So, I mean, I think we need to be clear that this isn't something that kind of threatens the kind of financial sustainability of the council. This isn't some great shopping mall that's going to drag the council down or something like that.
No, so we have indeed sold one of our investment properties in the next year's accounts. That'll obviously show. I mean, the values are at a point in time, and it's the best, you know, it's the best estimate of the value given all the information that is available to the valuers, and quite clearly, when we move a year on, things will have changed, and the value at that point will be based on different numbers. So, yeah, I mean, it is a moving feast. We have to value our investment properties every year. That's a requirement of the code. So, yeah, I don't know that there's anything more to say on it particularly. Sorry?
Sorry, Councillor Williams?
One of my questions was the valuation. Is it from a valuer from accounting, or has this been shown that it was valued wrong at purchase?
Well, I mean, the valuation changes as time goes by, so it's basic evaluation at a point in time. So it's, I mean, it could be very different to what the purchase price was. So, you know, some of them are a year on, so the valuation will have changed. So it's based on an accounting valuation at a point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. Ms. Dawson, I appreciate the care with which you are approaching the value for money reporting around the 4-day-week trial, and I don't want to in any way jeopardise you or pull you into some kind of uncomfortable political terrain. I would, however, like to just clarify, if your firm had a value for money concern about the current operating procedures of the council, am I correct in thinking that you would be obliged to make us and indeed others aware of that, even if you were auditing a kind of prior period at the time? Is that correct?
So yes, so the code is structured, the NAO Code of Audit Practice is structured so that we look at the current time at for the risks of significant weakness within the value for money arrangements, and were we to have a concern that there was a risk or indeed a significant weakness in those arrangements, then we are required to report that both to the council, and then if sufficiently significant, or if actions taken by the council are not sufficient in our view to address that weakness, to escalate that through a number of different reporting powers that we hold as auditors within the public sector. And the interesting dynamic that we have at the moment, Chair, is obviously we're in 23-24, which strictly speaking is Mr. Cardoza's responsibility. However, we are still the incumbent auditors. So it's one of the reasons why we have identified that you have an inspection notice and a best value notice that you need to address. And we have had a look at how the organisation is doing that. So there's a risk of weakness there, but we haven't identified a significant weakness in your response at this point, but we're making a recommendation that you continue to pay attention and respond accordingly using your governance arrangements. And we will continue to keep an eye on that until we have completed our audit responsibilities and handed over to KPMG, and would invoke our reporting requirements were we concerned that there was a significant weakness.
Thank you. So just to clarify for my own benefit, so you have highlighted a potential risk around how the organisation responds to the non-statutory best value notice. You have not identified, however, any significant weakness as we sit here now in that response or in the governance around that.
Exactly.
And in addition, you have not sort of, if we put to one side the non-statutory best value notice, independently of that, you have not identified any significant weaknesses in value for money in the way that the council is operating.
That is correct.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and we do appreciate your engagement with this issue, and I'm sure your advice will be very valuable in the future. Sorry, I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Williams. I've got a few other councillors who want to come in. Councillor Leeming, did you want to respond specifically on this question?
Yes, it's on your question and response. So there's been no significant, what you're saying, value for money concern raised, but I take it that's on the accounts in front of us and not within the year of the trial, which is the current year.
So we have identified, in our opinion, for the accounts in front of you, that there is a significant weakness in your arrangements for financial reporting, and that is referenced in our audit results report, which we have reported in previous years and again in relation to 2021. And we reported actually in our previous report on the 12th of October. So hopefully that's not new news to you. The point is that we then have a responsibility to consider the value for money arrangements up to the current point in time under the NAO code. And so we have not identified any additional significant weaknesses that we feel we need to report at this point up to the current time.
Thank you. I think that's clear. Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are with an eye to the next set of accounts, if that's okay. Looking down the list of risks, I wondered whether any of these would continue to be a risk in the 2021 set of accounts. So, for instance, are there any COVID-19 related government grants in the 2021 set of accounts? Do any of these risks have a tail into the next year, or are they incidents which have been identified and rectified, and then, for example, something like the index, you know, there was a problem with the indexation rates, that's now been reassessed and amended and presumably will continue into the future. I just wondered whether any of these risks are things that you see cropping up in 2021, please. I have another question to ask as well, but I'll leave that one first.
So this is 2021 in front of us. So I'm assuming you're talking 21-22 set of accounts and the audit that would be required there. I think it would be fair to say that all of these risks would be ones that we would assess and identify at the planning stage of our audit, because the nature of audit risks is such that the first couple are on the fraud risk. We are required to respond to those. Valuations across the different types of property within the portfolio that you hold have been an area of difficulty in the past. You're using valuers again in a number of those areas, so we would plan our procedures to identify whether or not we have the same issues or another error being made potentially by the valuation specialists that you use. And then presentation and disclosure of accounting items is an area which you know, the council has historically struggled with, and so we would maintain that as a risk going into this next set of accounts. And pension liabilities is, by its nature, because it's a complex estimate using specialists, we would typically keep that as either a significant or a higher inherent risk. So actually, I would anticipate that all of these risks would appear in an audit plan for the following year.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. I'd like to ask about progress with the 2021-22 accounts, please. So the last time we spoke, we were awaiting national government guidance on how to address these late accounts. As I understand it, this is the last, there is this set, then there's the 2022-23 accounts, and at the moment only 1% of local authorities have actually completed their 2022-23 accounts. So this 2021-22 set of accounts is, if once we completed those, we would be moving into the body of, you know, pretty standard place for local authorities. Are we still awaiting national government guidance on how to proceed with the 2021-22 accounts?
We are still waiting for guidance, unfortunately. So the initial proposals by the department, both on the 17th of July and then also in the previous minister's article in Municipal Journal in October, set out that resetting the system was still an objective, and those proposals included moving forward to a backstop date, which would be the 31st of March 24, to close out all open audits up to 22-23. So were that guidance to come in, we would be discussing with officers whether or not the 21-22 accounts and audit and 22-23 accounts and audit would be subject to that backstop date and be disclaimed, so that then the organisation could move on to its 23-24 accounts with its new auditors and move forward to try and reset the time frame and get back on track in terms of reporting and auditing. Unfortunately, the guidance hasn't come out. We as an organisation are therefore planning our resources on the basis that we will complete our value for money reporting up to 22-23, because we know that that will be still a requirement, and we are closing out as many audits as we possibly can in the meantime while we wait for that guidance. Now the issue, and I think it's in another report to the committee today, but the issue is that the council has yet to finalise its 21-22 accounts and hasn't produced its 22-23 accounts yet, and therefore it may run out of time if a backstop date were enacted. So I think we're still in a bit of a watch this space, unfortunately, until we see what the nature of that guidance is, and then have a discussion with officers as to how that will apply to South Cambs.
Thank you for that. That's very frustrating in a sense, because we all would like to be able to make tangible plans and move forward. And thank you for your work on this set of accounts.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions from members of the committee? I will come to Mr. Maddock in a second, but I wonder just to build on that last point, Ms. Dawson. So would your advice to the authority be that we should proceed to get sort of draft sets of accounts for whatever the 2 years are, sort of as swiftly as possible, and have those available to you? Is there anything more that you need from us? I know you mentioned that the value for money audit will still need to take place. I'm a little concerned at the prospect of trying to do 2 value for money audits in, say, 3 months, as it might be. Is there anything that we should be, how can we best prepare for what looks to be a busy spring next year?
So on the value for money work, we're substantially completed on that, and the code allows us to report once on value for money over multiple periods, multiple years. So actually, I'm hoping that will be relatively light touch from an officer perspective. I think our advice would be to get the 21-22 accounts and the inspection period, and the 22-23 accounts in draft and an inspection period completed, because that is a requirement of the organisation to do so. So effort on that would be well spent, because that again will set you up well for preparing your 23-24 accounts should a reset be announced, and then that will allow you to move forward with prepared draft statements.
Thank you for that. I will just come to Mr. Maddock just to sum up, and if you want to make any further comments before I close this item.
Just to say thank you to the audit team for their work. Again, it's been a little bit of an elongated audit, but nevertheless, I think we've got through it rather quicker than the previous 2. Yeah, thanks to the committee for their support through the process as well. That's very much appreciated. Certainly our intention is, and we are pressing ahead with the 21-22 accounts, and we are intending to have that completed by Christmas, and hopefully at that point we'll have a better idea of what's happening longer term. And as Janet said, I think a discussion with the audit team as soon as we possibly can, when we have a bit more clarity, will be really helpful, and then we can map out the best way forward to achieve what we can possibly achieve in the time that we've got. So just to thank you for completing the audit, and onwards and upwards, as they say.
Into a brave new world. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Maddock, and again, thank you, Ms. Dawson and Mr. Russell, for attending today, and indeed for all your work up to this point. We will hope for an early Christmas present from DLUC to show us the way forward. So thank you very much. We've been asked to note this report, and we have done so. So we move seamlessly on to item 5, which is the approval of the statement of accounts for the year 2021. Mr. Maddock, is there anything you would like to say on this item before I open it up to the committee?
Just to say, you've got the revised set of accounts before you. I have the set here for signing later. And I'm happy to say that we are in a position now to sign off the 2021 audit. I do refer in the report to 3 adjustments that have occurred since the set we presented in October. These have all been referred to in the previous report. The first one relating to investment properties was actually reported verbally at the last meeting. And as I said, we didn't feel it necessary or really anything to be gained from doing further work following the information provided by EY's valuers. And similarly, with the housing stock, it was a similar issue where the valuation provided to us was not felt to be within a range that EY could agree. And again, it was felt it wasn't really appropriate or really of any value to do further work on that. So we've, in both cases, we've accepted the valuation that EY have provided. In both these areas, the 21-22 accounts will see a further valuation, and we've spoken to the valuers around the issues that have been brought to our attention by EY, so that when the valuations for 21-22 are provided, those will take into account the comment about the properties being valued on a leasehold basis rather than a freehold basis, and also the issues in relation to our council dwellings. The third item was a further small adjustment in relation to the pensions liability. There was also 1 or 2 disclosure items, and I think Mark referred to an additional leasing note that we hadn't included that we now include, and that's around lease income that we can expect in the longer term, broken down over time periods, and that's a requirement of the code. I don't think there's anything particularly further to draw out. There is a table after the accounts that shows the changes between the balance sheet that we had. I was just looking for it, actually, it's quite a long way down the agenda. Oh, there we go. So it's page 143. So it's just, it compares the balance sheet figures that we had in October to those that we now have. And the 3 adjustments are highlighted in the fourth column rather, in the sort of salmony colour. So if there's any questions, perhaps I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. As you say, we have discussed a number of these issues in the previous item, and as you said, then there's a lot of sort of subjective analysis in the valuation of investment properties, and indeed in our wider property stock. So it's not surprising that this is an area of focus and perhaps even disagreement between different valuers. Are there any comments or questions that people would like to make on the final accounts for 2020-21? Councillor Williams, and I'll come to you, Councillor Harvey.
I suppose just first for the public benefit to confirm that there's no cash variance, there's no cash effect based on the issues and valuation of things that have changed. It's just to, if officer could confirm that just for thank you, for people to see. The other thing, and I'm sure I was not explaining myself correctly or clearly, in relation to paragraph 6 on page 11, when the properties were bought, did we pay a price based on a valuation of a leasehold or in error a freehold? Because this is what I'm trying to understand, is when I don't feel I've actually had an answer to this, because we're saying that the issue is that they've been valued wrong. What I'm seeking to achieve is what happened at that point of purchase. So did we pay a freehold price for a leasehold? I hope we didn't, but I don't feel that's been clarified, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry for not understanding the precise nature of that question before. Mr. Maddock, are you able to just confirm, well, there's the cash point and then also this the purchase price issue?
Yeah, so the adjustments you have before you there's no cash basis behind that. Their valuations based at a point in time. And I can confirm that properties would have been purchased as leasehold properties, and that was obviously part of the due diligence that was carried out at the time.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey. Apologies for that. Yes, on page 24, the narrative statement on council tax, I was just a bit confused and I wondered if there was an error in here because it's explaining that council tax set by the council is substantially below the average charged by other shire districts because we've been able to use a proportion of our reserves to keep the amount of council tax down that residents would have to pay. And it talks about the increasing gap between the actual and underlying council tax. But given what I've just explained, or what you've just explained there, wouldn't that be a decreasing gap between actual and underlying? I suppose what I'm saying is the underlying amount presumably is a slightly higher level than residents are currently paying, and given that government subsidies, etc., are decreasing, they would expect the actual to be gradually approaching the underlying amount from below, if you like. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Yes, Mr. Malik, do you have any? Can you explain that paragraph in perhaps a different way?
So that's our page 7 in our statement. Yeah. So
yes,
historically, there was a period when the council did use reserves to restrict the increase in the council tax. Obviously, we're not doing that at the moment. So that's more of a historical comment. The increasing gap between the actual and underlying. I think I probably need to revisit that sentence because I think you're probably right. It's probably a historical phrase because the gap, we're increasing in line with what we're allowed to increase. So I don't think the gap was a historical gap, which has remained the same as far as so I think that wording probably needs to be amended.
I mean, perhaps we can. It's not a kind of fundamental part of the accounts. Perhaps we can just in the next set of accounts. Perhaps we can just reformulate that paragraph and make sure it's clear. I'm not sure it's worth amending at this point, but we will be publishing 2 more sets in quick succession. So let's just update that with that wording for that. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. That's very useful.
Yeah. Okay. Cheers.
Any further comments? Excellent. So we have been asked to approve the statement of accounts for 2021. So that I can sign them later. I will ask for this to be voted on if you will indulge me. Can I see all those in favour of approving the 2020-21 accounts, please? Thank you very much indeed. We move to item. Sorry, Councillor Leaming.
Thank you. Can I just thank all the people that have been involved with creating this set of accounts? I know it's been a lot of work. Thank you very much.
Indeed, well said. Thank you. Item 6 is an update on the topical corporate governance matters. We have Mr. Tully with us in the chamber. Thank you very much for coming today. Could you please present your report?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So this is our regular governance risk and control updates. We are on page 146 of your agenda packs. It's a briefer report this time because we only just brought you a update report to the previous committee meeting, which was but a month ago, but there are some useful updates in there to be aware of. So I'll just talk you through some of the key points in that. In terms of internal audits delivered, we've just delivered 1 since the last month. That was a grant assurance certification. It was an interesting one because it was an interim assurance report. Normally, you'll provide assurance at the end of the grant scheme. But it's an opportunity, I suppose, for central government to check in and make sure that things are going according to plan. So we did that and it was generally okay. We gave that reasonable assurance. We identified just some opportunities to improve some of the internal controls in terms of paperwork retention, but nothing that exciting really. So that was good, positive, reasonable assurance. In terms of counter fraud, we've got the Q2 statistics in, so we included that in the reports. Speaking to our fraud manager, there's nothing too exciting to report here, but we have highlighted 3 things in terms of team developments that's worth considering. Just a progress update on our county-wide fraud project, which has got the acronym CCFI. That is progressing well. And then we've got some new software which we're trialling in the organisation called Trust ID. And also we made reference to the training that we delivered to members on fraud earlier in July. Then just the final parts of this report, which are worth noting, we just highlighted for your awareness, not local updates, but more sort of national updates. Two things: Cyber Impact, the LGA, have provided some training material on cybersecurity, which you might want to have a look at. It's very helpful. And then secondly, the National Crime Agency have provided annual update on serious organised crime. So some large statistics in there, which you might find of interest. So those were really just the key points, very brief updates. Happy to take any comments or questions about them.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, really, that I think the work that's been done to tackle fraud can never be rewarded enough, because, and I've said it before, we will never be able to calculate financially what this saves. And I think when something does not have that figure in people's minds, it can sometimes be hard to sort of allocate resources and the like. So I think they're a small team, but they are mighty and they are doing incredibly well. I think that should be recognised by committee. I think it's interesting that obviously council tax is one of the highest areas. It's probably not a surprise, and I imagine there's probably more on the others. They're just harder. Council tax, again, is something that's a lot more simpler to process. So I hope that I think they're doing very well, and I hope to see more and more figures on here, because that's how we set a deterrent. And you're going to tell me if I'm wrong, but is it hashtag do the right thing? Is that what we're working to? So I hope all members, and I'm sure all members, will be backing that campaign. And cybersecurity, I think, is something that everybody at the council is becoming more and more concerned about, and so pleased to see that work is being done there, because it's probably one of the highest threats we have in modern age.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Howell.
Thank you. I'm referring to page 151. Quick question. I see that we have 58 live investigations at the time of writing this report. And then later on you say we have appointed some external solicitors to help support the process of case files for potential prosecution. I want to know, if the person was found to be has committed fraud, I'm assuming that we claim that back. Do we also claim back the expense of external solicitors and any other officer type, because against the fraud of the person as well? Thank you.
We have got a number of cases that are going forward for prosecution, and our legal team have needed a little bit of support on those cases. Now, they'll obviously go through the legal process, and when they get to court, and if we potentially get awarded costs, I might have to come back with a bit more detail on this, because I don't know the detail on it, but certainly
with your indulgence,
we've got a number of...
That's fine, I'm happy with that. Can I just ask then, if a case doesn't go to court, for whatever reason, it doesn't go to court, but we do find the fraud has been committed, do we claim as well then, when we are in negotiations with the person, for the time that we've had to spend investigating, especially if we've used an external source? I'm happy to have a written answer on that as well.
I mean, we do have a possibility of levying an administrative penalty in some cases, so that will be an alternative to going to court. But I can certainly find out more detail in relation to this for you, Councillor Howell.
Chairman, I'm very happy with that.
Thank you, yes. And I think at an appropriate time, I'm sure the committee would be interested to understand how these cases develop and what kind of further progress is made. It's clearly a very important deterrent, if nothing else. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. In future reports, and I'm looking at the same number that Councillor Howell referred to, could we have another column saying whether the number's gone up or down? Obviously, we'd like to think that paying for external solicitors will bring the number of cases down, but we would like, I think, to see the trend, please.
Thank you. I think that's a very sensible suggestion. Yeah, some sense of the kind of the work, the sort of the backlog, well, not backlog necessarily, but the kind of workload of the team and what they're kind of working through at the moment. That would aid our understanding. Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. May I ask how the kind of information presented in this report compares with similar data produced by other local authorities? Do we do occasional benchmarking exercises? And if so, what do they reveal? Well, first of all, what's their utility and what do they reveal? So, yeah, what's the benefit of benchmarking and comparison?
I don't think we specifically benchmark against other councils. I think the indicators we've got here were ones which were designed internally to best suit our needs. So I don't know, we might be able to have some comparison data elsewhere, but probably no guarantee of it because I don't think it was designed or set up in that fashion. But you raise an interesting point. There's a big assumption, of course, that other people record stuff in the same way as us. It's probably very tricky to answer. Yeah.
Thank you. It would perhaps just be worth, sorry, Councillor Stobart.
Quite understand. I mean, whenever data is presented, there's a whole set of assumptions which you really have to test for, for comparability. But it would be perhaps helpful to know that we weren't, a whole lot worse in our performance than other similar districts. But of course, then there's a question of local circumstance and so on. So, to be approached with caution, but some external validation or check of how we're doing, I think would always be valuable.
Sorry, Mr. Malik, did you want to comment?
I think it's an interesting area because I think different local authorities do approach fraud prevention and fraud investigation very differently. I think some authorities probably haven't got as much of a resource to look at fraud as they probably should. Comparisons are quite difficult to do. There is some benchmarking data out there, but it's quite difficult to compare like for like. And I know it's something we have started to look at, but actually, trying to find some data that where we're comparing apples with apples may not be as easy as perhaps I first thought.
I mean, perhaps rather than something as kind of perhaps as sort of formally structured as benchmarking, perhaps through the LGA they might be able to recommend here's a council that exhibits kind of best practice in some of these areas in terms of its approach and in how it reports back to committee, and maybe we could just do a kind of comparison with some best cases rather than statistical neighbours and all that good stuff, and perhaps a slightly more kind of sort of targeted approach in this case. Excellent. Were there any other members that wanted to comment on the report? Councillor Leamy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On page 153, the report mentions that some new software has been introduced, Trust ID. I wondered when that was introduced, and is there any data that this produces to show whether any fraudulent applications have been found? And how does it actually work? Is it searching through national data? I'd like to understand a little bit more about what it is, when it started, and perhaps who else uses this software as well, please.
Yeah, thank you. So, Trust ID has been with us for a little while. It's been updated quite recently to a sort of online cloud type system. And I think my understanding of it is that if you want to check someone's identity, you can upload some information and get back an answer pretty quickly. I don't know massive amount of detail, and again, we can provide further detail on it, but it's certainly something we're encouraging officers across the council to use as a way of making sure that people there, that are interacting with them are who they say they are. Certainly we know housing are using it. We're basically trying to make use of it as much as we can because we've actually got credits in hand on the system, so if we don't use them, we'll lose them. But, it seems to me to be a pretty good fraud prevention tool that we can use. But I can certainly get you more detail on exactly how it works, if that will be of interest.
Thank you. Yes, perhaps at a future meeting we could just understand kind of what the uptake has been, perhaps across the council for this tool, and any kind of notable. I mean, I guess the successes aren't going to be particularly exciting, but you know, any kind of cases where we've identified, you know, it's prevented a fraudulent, or you know, it's stopped concerns kind of early on. That would be, I think, it would be interesting and good to give it perhaps that heightened visibility across the council.
I'm pretty certain it has
yeah.
things up here.
Fantastic, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Leeming. Oh, good.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about what it is. Have any organisations that we work with use this software? Is it something that we've been recommended to use? Why did we choose this particular software?
I'm trying to think. It was possibly in place before the past year as a sort of desktop version. What we're looking here in terms of new software is making use of an online version, which is more sort of real time. I think it has. I'm familiar with it being used by quite a few other councils. I was involved in procurement myself, but it's a reasonably well-known system, I think.
From memory, I'm just trying to recollect. From memory, I think we purchased it a few years ago in relation to homelessness applications. I believe it started off in housing to review people who were applying as homelessness to do those checks. And I think during COVID, it probably wasn't getting as much use, and then they launched an online system. And I think we thought at that point, yeah, this is a really easy system to use, let's push this more. So the fraud team have been proactively pushing the use of this across the council so that we meet our fraud prevention duties as a local authority.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think those are all the questions on this report. Thank you, Mr. Tully and Mr. Maddock, for answering our questions. We've been asked to note the report and comment, and we have done so. Item 7, our last substantive item, is the Ombudsman Annual Review Letter 2022-23. I understand that we have Mr. Ledger joining us remotely to present this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So Phil Bird was originally going to be presenting this item today, but unfortunately he's unwell, so I'm going to be doing my best to fill his shoes. So really just to kind of introduce the letter. The item and the letter really outlines the findings from the local government ombudsman from complaints that have been submitted to the ombudsman about the council between the 1st of April 2022 and the 31st of March 2023. The complaints are submitted to the Ombudsman as stage 3 of our complaints process. So the letter provides details of those complaints that have been submitted to the Ombudsman, having already been through the Council's stage 1 and stage 2 processes. The letter explains that in total 24 complaints were received by the Ombudsman across this period, and of those they took forward and investigated 6, and 5 of those were upheld, meaning that there was an upheld rate of 83% of the complaints that they investigated. Of those that weren't investigated, these were either referred back for local resolution, they were found to be incomplete, invalid, or they were not upheld after some initial inquiries. In terms of those complaints that were upheld, it's worth mentioning that 3 of those related to the same issue. And whilst each of those cases were considered and investigated separately, they all related to the same case and the same issue. And that case was primarily around a planning site visit which had been undertaken, but there wasn't a record that was made of that site visit, or kind of the findings from the visit i.e. around kind of why we did or didn't take a particular course of action. And I've spoken to Heather Jones from the Greater Cambridge Planning Service about this particular instance. She's kind of said that there's been a significant review of the systems and processes that are in place. So she feels confident that that one kind of instance, which resulted in 3 complaints to the Ombudsman, has been resolved, and the lessons from that have really kind of been learned and integrated into that review. So a further complaint that was upheld was in relation to a decision toward a COVID-19 restart grant for, excuse me, for businesses at a lower level that was expected by the complainant. And the outcome of that particular complaint was that no fault was found around the actual decision making, but it was more around kind of the communication. So in particular, there was reference to a food license that it was said was needed as part in order to make that decision. And the LGO, the Local Government Ombudsman, found that that was actually an error, and that when questioned by the complainant in February 2022, the query wasn't immediately addressed, and it was only addressed in April 22. But the LGO did confirm that they didn't feel that that had a impact on the decision that was made. So they did think that the decision was correct. So kind of zooming out a bit from those kind of specifics, as mentioned, the letter does note that we have an upheld rate of 83% for this financial year. It kind of cautions against comparing that with previous years, because they detail a change in the way that they decide whether or not that they will investigate. This means that they're less likely to look at borderline issues, and as such are naturally finding a higher proportion at fault. However, they have kind of pointed out that our upheld rate for this year, the 5 out of 6, was a bit higher than that of similar organisations during the period. And by way of comparison, I've had a quick look at the upheld rates for some of our SIPFA nearest neighbours, and I've seen that one of those had an upheld rate of 17%, 3 had 33%, 3 had 50%, 1 had 75%, and 3 had 100%. So just a little bit of context in terms of how that compares with others. But really, to kind of draw this to my introduction and kind of presentation of this letter to a conclusion, we are kind of really aware that in relation to complaints, it's important that we're continuing to make sure that we are undertaking effective complaints handling processes. And off the back of this letter and its findings, an item has been presented to the corporate management team, the slides from which are included in the agenda pack, page 165, really to discuss how we can make sure that we are learning from our complaints and making sure that our processes are robust going forward. And off the back of that, it was decided that there would be a 6-monthly learning from complaints agenda item at corporate management team, really to just build on the work that's kind of taken place to date and over recent years to improve our complaints handling processes. So that's a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of the letter and some of the context around it. More than happy to open up to any comments or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ledger, and thank you very much indeed for standing in. I imagine at quite short notice this morning. I expect there will be some questions from members of the committee, but I'll completely understand if there's anything that you would rather provide a written response to, given the short notice in the situation, I will of course understand. Just for my benefit, I did find this a slightly strange letter to understand what it was trying to tell us. It seems to me that the the percentage of complaints upheld is more of a KPI for the Ombudsman themselves as to whether or not they're investigating the right cases rather than necessarily telling us anything very interesting. Do you think you could give either a rough or exact answer as to how many complaints enter our kind of stage 1 process? Because I think really for me that would be a more interesting comparison. So we ended up, at the very end of this process, we end up with 6 complaints being investigated and 5 of them being upheld. But I wonder, how does that compare to where we kind of started this journey right back at stage 1? Roughly how many complaints are we looking at on a kind of annual basis? That would be helpful if you had it roughly.
I mean, I can't say an exact figure as you kind of have asked for a rough figure. I think you anticipated that, but I mean, I would like to go away and come back to you with an exact figure, if that's all right, for the number that were received in this financial year. But at a kind of guess, I would really put it in the range of about 150 complaints across the organisation. But that is a guess, so I would like to kind of come back and really just confirm whether that is an accurate ballpark figure or not.
Thank you. It was the sort of scale that I was looking for, so that's helpful. But I think, yes, and perhaps in future, if we can, when we review this letter, if we can look at it in the context of all of our, I appreciate it was not yourself that prepared this report, but if we can look at it in the context of our overall complaints process, I think that'll just help members of the committee understand it in detail.
Absolutely.
Now I've got a few councillors who want to ask questions themselves. So Councillor Williamson, I'll come to you, Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, through yourself, Chair, because I think one thing that puzzles me is on the first agenda item, it's clear that this email lettered was sent on the 19th of July 2023, so obviously email, it'd be quite instant, and yet this is the 3rd meeting that it's coming to us, and I'm pretty sure from recollection we'd have normally had it at the meeting after, or at least the 2nd meeting, so just wondering why it's taken so long to get to us. And then in relation to page 163, we can see that there are several cases where financial redress has been required for avoidable distress, time and trouble. Just wondering if you could put a figure, or potentially we might have to have that in writing, of how much we have paid essentially in compensation for these cases. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not sure we'd want to disclose individual amounts, but perhaps the total amount paid out in compensation over the course of the year would, I think, be an interesting figure for the committee. Happy to take that now or in writing. Do you want to comment on that?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm absolutely happy to go away and follow that up and provide you with a written response to that in relation to the amounts of compensation paid out.
Thank you. Do you know the process by which this letter has arrived at this committee in terms of, I mean, presumably the letter was received and then you had to write a report alongside it, but the question was raised as to why it didn't come to an earlier meeting of this committee. Again, happy to receive a written response, as you may not know yourself.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know the full background to that. Again, sorry to kind of have to fall back on the same answer, but I'm more than happy to kind of go away and find that out and give an answer as to why it didn't come sooner and maybe a bit of a proposal in terms of the timing of when this comes to committee going forward.
Thank you. I think that would be sensible, just to kind of bottom out that process. Did you want to come back at all?
Yes, I think historically it did used to come to the July meeting, unless I'm getting a nod from Patrick. So if we could go back to that, because obviously the delay, July, September, if it came after the date, it's just obviously it's already a certain amount out of date by the time we get it, so we don't want it any further than necessary.
It's a long way off the most out-of-date report I've received at a committee, but yes, I think potentially this year, I think the July meeting will be brought forward a little bit because of summer holidays, etc. So it may be that September is a reasonable point to aim for. I mean, if it's going to be sent on the 19th, we may well be meeting on the 22nd or something off the top of my head. So I think probably September would be a sensible point to aim for in the future. Councillor Stobart, sorry, I believe you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. The numbers are small. So if you look at the presentation, actually that confirms Kevin's comments about numbers. But what actually goes goes through to this stage 3 process where it gets submitted to the Ombudsman, it's quite small. But any complaint is a kind of a diagnostic of the organisation, isn't it? It's indicating that there's some issue. And I wondered, perhaps as a general question, from the complaints and how they're handled, can we identify the difference between something structural, in other words, we're doing something wrong, and procedural, in other words, we're doing it right, but we're not managing it well? And then finally, if I might use the term, the outliers that find their way to stage 3 are also indicative in some way, but perhaps hard to generalise, just how that response should be managed. So I suppose to sum up, the question I'm posing here is, how are we managing complaints? Are we doing it in an orderly way, which tell us, is it an organisational issue, is it a management question? And then for the outliers, just what is that telling us about the organisation, and the way we respond and the reactions that we get, does that give us some more feedback? How do we make this all work for us?
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Mr. Ledger, I think you mentioned that there were kind of regular reports now going to the corporate management team. Perhaps if you could elaborate on that a little further, that might answer some of Councillor Stobart's question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we discussed at the meeting at the end of October was around how we can get more intelligence, I guess, from the feedback that we're receiving through our complaints. There were certainly kind of some comments around how some of the themes that we've had in place internally for quite a while are quite blunt. And so kind of, whilst it gives you an overall indication, I suppose, of where we're receiving our complaints and the types of complaints that we're receiving. One of the comments that we've discussed at CMT was around kind of whether we could look to review those themes that we are applying and using to categorise the different complaints that we have, so that they give a little bit more insight as to the types of complaints that we're receiving, and as you mentioned, those ones which are kind of proceeding through the different stages and eventually ending up with the Ombudsman. So that's certainly something that we kind of have in mind and that I think we're going to be looking at going forward. And something else to mention is around really kind of trying to push and relaunch our learning from complaints processes, whereby upon completion of a or response to a complaint, the responding manager is asked to kind of answer a few questions about whether there were any kind of lessons to be learnt specifically in relation to that complaint, so that we can kind of gather that data a little bit more easily and look to undertake some analysis, before really receiving the letter from the Ombudsman, that kind of really does kind of provide some insight and intelligence to the corporate management team when they're going to be having those 6-monthly sessions reviewing kind of learning from complaints going forward. So that's a little bit of detail, I guess, around some of those processes. I don't know if that's kind of started to answer your question or not.
Through you, Chair, very helpful response. So grappling with these kind of issues and looking more deeply, I think is going to be particularly rewarding. I think it behoves us to do that. Any complaint is it may be a cry for help, but it's certainly an indication that something's not working quite right and we need to address it at face value. But then adopting this more analytical approach. We say we want to deliver value to the council through this process, however difficult it might be. We have to do that. So just one comment on the Ombudsman's numbers. I think we have to go along with it because the Ombudsman is the Ombudsman. But I think the comparison with our nearest neighbours was very helpful. But also, we should look at those numbers and perhaps take the absolutes. There were 6 complaints, but that is still 6 complaints and 5 were upheld. Well, so that is a small number, but it's still quite significant and needs to be regarded. So you might think, well, let's look at the Ombudsman's response as a proportion of all the complaints received. That's a small number, but I think it doesn't take away from the fact that that number exists. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stobart. You're right, of course, that each of these complaints is very important in its own right, and both in terms of how it affects the complainant and also, as you say, an opportunity for the council to learn and diagnose issues before they perhaps become more widespread. Are there any? Sorry, Councillor Sanford, I think you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Ledger, I've got a couple of questions about the complaints by service category numbers. 2/3 roughly relate to shared services, planning and environmental services. Firstly, is there a process by which complaints are allocated to either South Cambs or Cambridge? And also, is there any identification if the sharing mechanisms are not working correctly, if there's not communication between the 2 councils?
I'll answer the second part of the question first, if that's all right. So I think one of the things that I'd say in relation to kind of the quantity of complaints, particularly in relation to the planning service, is that they've done an incredible amount of work over the last year or so to reduce kind of the backlog of complaints that they previously had, and I believe that there's not been a backlog of complaints for about the last 6 months or so, which is quite a big difference from the situation that we were in, whereby there was a backlog of complaints, and what happens when there is a backlog of complaints is that it generates more complaints. Because someone doesn't necessarily kind of receive a timely response to a stage 1 complaint, the automatic thing for that person to do is to escalate it and submit that at stage 2. So I mean, I can only really answer from my own kind of personal kind of knowledge of the shared services and complaints, but certainly I would say that that's likely to have had a significant impact on the quantity of complaints that we were receiving, particularly for the shared planning service. I also know that kind of as well as removing working through and removing the backlog of complaints, there was also kind of work to improve our response, our determination times in relation to planning applications, etc. So again, I think that kind of that work, broadly speaking, I think we would hope that would start to be seen in terms of the numbers that we're receiving kind of for this financial year. And certainly kind of in terms of the time that it takes to respond to complaints has significantly improved in that area. The other kind of shared service, I believe, probably referring to, it would be kind of the shared waste service. And again, I mean, I'm only speaking from my own kind of knowledge, but I believe that in terms of like the services that we deliver, across the council, the shared waste service is really our highest volume kind of service. So we are kind of having a really high number of interactions in terms of like picking up people's bins, etc. Through that service. So for me, my kind of hypothesis would be that would be kind of potentially why there is a higher number of complaints for that particular service as well, is because of the sheer quantity of bins that we're picking up and the large number of people that we're delivering that service to. So that would be my kind of answer in relation to that. But again, if that's if you kind of would like any further investigation into that, or any kind of broader opinion on that, then please do say, and we can look to submit a written response. And there was a first part of the question which I've now got so wrapped up in answering the second part I've forgotten.
In the context of how complaints are allocated, whether they're allocated to South Cambs or Cambridge, what the process is there.
Yeah, so I believe that just is dependent on where the what the complaint relates to. So, for example, if it relates to a planning application that falls within the city boundaries, I believe that's kind of dealt with through the Cambridge City's planning complaint system and processes, which I think are very similar to ours. But I might again kind of just go away and double check and confirm that, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, Patrick. There were quite a lot of requests for written responses. Are you confident we've got a note of what those are? Fantastic. Thank you. Any final comments on this? Excellent. Thank you very much again, Mr. Ledger, for stepping in and providing answers where possible. We do really appreciate that. Thank you very much for coming along. We've been asked to note this report and comment, and we have done so. Item 8, matters of topical interest. Do any officers or members wish to raise any matters of topical interest? No. So finally, the date of the next meeting is currently scheduled as the 19th of March 2024 at 10 a.m. I think we may well need a January meeting by the sounds of things, so keep an eye out for that. I also have in my head that the 19th of March is potentially a county council full council day, where we're setting our budget. So that date may have to change as well. So anyway, as printed up. Yeah, no, I'll change that one. That'll be easier, yeah. Anyway, so the date of the next meeting is notionally the 19th of March 2024 at 10 a.m, but do keep an eye out for any changes to that. Thank you all very much for attending today. I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair.